Before Gordon Ramsay became television's most recognizable chef, before fine dining chefs became celebrities, before the idea of a rock star chef even made sense, there was Marco Pierre White. A chef who didn't just cook at the highest level in Britain, he changed what chefs were allowed to be seen as. And then, at the peak of his power, he gave it all away. If you're into stories like this, about chefs, restaurants, and the art of cooking great food, subscribe to the channel for more. And if you enjoyed the video, leaving a like really helps more than you think. Most chefs become famous for what they cook. Marco Pierre White becomes famous for what he brought into the kitchen with him. Because by the time Marco arrives, chefs are already visible. Paul Bocuse had already helped turn chefs into public figures. The idea of a chef as someone the world recognizes already exists, but it's still controlled, contained, formal, almost distant. And in many kitchens, especially at the highest level, chefs were still expected to present a certain version of themselves, composed, disciplined, almost guarded. Marco changes something inside that structure, because what he introduces isn't visibility, it's personality. He makes it normal for chefs to be seen as intense, unpredictable, magnetic figures, not just skilled craftspeople. And more importantly, he makes it acceptable for that personality to be visible, for chefs to stop filtering themselves the moment they step into the kitchen, and instead, the world sees what the level of pressure actually produces. Because underneath the cooking, there's something human happening. Frustration, obsession, ego, control, expression. And Marco is one of the first chefs where that inner world doesn't stay hidden anymore. It becomes part of the experience. And that changes how kitchens function socially. Because suddenly, it isn't just about what's being cooked, it's about who's cooking it, and how they carry the room while they do it. But Marco didn't start as a myth. He started in chaos and pressure, and kitchens where identity wasn't built in public, but forged under it. Marco Pierre White was born in Leeds, England in 1961. His father was a chef, and from the beginning, food wasn't something elegant or romantic, it was work. Long hours, hot kitchens, constant pressure. And early on, Marco didn't grow up thinking about cuisine as art. He grew up inside the machine that produces it. That distinction matters, because it explains a lot about who he becomes later. Marco doesn't come from refinement, he comes from intensity. He leaves school early and enters kitchens young. And what he finds there is not inspiration, but hierarchy, authority, and silence. Repetition at scale. In those kitchens, you don't get to be creative. You earn the right to be precise first. And Marco learns quickly that unlike many chefs who submit to that system, he absorbs it, and then begins to push against it, even before anyone knows his name. Marco's early training takes him through some of the most demanding kitchens in Britain and Europe. But the most important influence isn't just a single restaurant, it's a system. At the time, French cuisine still defines the highest level of fine dining. And in Britain, that influence is being carried by a small number of chefs who are building some of the most serious kitchens in the country. The Roux brothers, Albert and Michael Roux Sr., Pierre Kaufmann, and Raymond Blanc. These weren't just restaurants, they were institutions. Each one represents a different expression of the same idea. Precision is discipline, and discipline is identity. And for a young chef coming up in that world, these kitchens were not education in the soft sense. They were formative. Because Marco moves through them at a time when kitchen hierarchy is absolute. The Roux kitchens teach structure. Kaufmann's kitchen teaches brutality of detail, just how far perfection actually goes when nothing is allowed to slip. And Blanc's world refines that further into control, elegance, and expectation at the highest level. And Marco absorbs all of it, not just the technique, but the atmosphere, the pressure, the standard. And something else begins to form under the surface. Because most chefs who come through these kitchens become highly disciplined, highly controlled, highly reliable. Marco becomes something different. He doesn't just internalize the system, he reacts against it. He takes that structure and turns it into pressure. And pressure, in this world, doesn't just produce food, it produces identity. This is where Marco Pierre White begins to form, not just as a chef, but as a presence. Someone whose reputation starts moving ahead of him. Before he enters a kitchen, before he speaks, before service even begins. And in fine dining, that kind of reputation is rare. Because most chefs are known for their food. Marco starts becoming known for what it feels like to work under him, and that changes everything. Then comes Harvey's, the restaurant that changes everything. Because at Harvey's, Marco Pierre White becomes the youngest chef in history to earn 3 Michelin stars. And suddenly, the industry has to pay attention, not just to the food, but to the man. Because Marco doesn't behave like other chefs of his time. He is intense, unfiltered, unapologetic, and demanding. Some would say impossible.
Gordon. I asked for the bass and I still haven't got it in. Why haven't I got the bass in, Stephen?
Right, please.
Quickly, I want these 3 terrine. Service, come on, table 16.
A lot of the time when I lose my temper in the kitchen is because people put me in the shed.
Well, if it's necessary, yes, then yes. If it's not, then no. Don't ask me a stupid question.
There's no way I can sort of explain why I go crazy, really, apart from when people are spending a lot of money, and it's got to be done right.
Hey. You see the difference? You see that's not going to bleed, okay? Yeah, go.
At the end of the day, we've got to get results, and I don't care how we get them. I don't care how many boys we've got to go through to get them.
But the results speak for themselves, because Harvey's becomes one of the defining restaurants of its era, and Marco becomes something new entirely. A chef with a personality, a public image, a reputation that exists outside of the kitchen and beyond the dining room. And this is where the idea of the bad boy chef begins. Not because it was planned, but because it was real. Marco is emotional, explosive, obsessive about standards, and completely uninterested in containing that to the kitchen. He doesn't watch his tongue during interviews. He never buttons up his image in front of the camera.
I can't do you. I'm full. I've got to do you. I'll tell you what I can do for you. I can do you at 9:30. You're desperate, are you? Would you like to give me your number? And your bedroom number? That sounds rather nice. Room 20. I'll have you a nice table. Bye-bye.
And the world responds, because suddenly, chefs aren't just polished technicians anymore. They're characters. And Marco is the first one who feels like a main character. And more than that, he makes it cool to be a chef. For the first time, the intensity, the pressure, the ego, the chaos of the kitchen doesn't just stay hidden behind the pass. It becomes part of the appeal. Being a chef isn't just respected anymore. It's wanted. It has presence, it has identity, it has attitude. This is where Marco Pierre White stops being just a chef and starts becoming an image, a symbol. Because what he represents is bigger than food. He represents pressure, intensity, control, and unpredictability. And what makes that so important is that Marco didn't invent the hardship of kitchen life. The exhaustion was already there. The long hours were already there. The pressure, the hierarchy, the obsession, the emotional toll. None of it begins with him. It existed in the kitchens he trained in, and in the kitchens his mentors trained in before that. But Marco is different in one important way. He doesn't hide what that life costs. He doesn't present great cooking as something elegant or effortless. He brings the strain of it into full view. The exhaustion, the volatility, the obsession, the idea that running a 3-star kitchen demands everything from you, and then asks for more.
There's no point in doing this, Marco.
Well, fine, you can go.
There's no...
The door's over there.
No, but if you're not going to cooperate,
You know, all I've got to do is
make...
all I've got to do is make the sauce.
Yeah, but how...
That is what I'm being paid for.
Yeah.
Not being paid for anything else, to make the sauce.
But I was engaging you in something so that
Sorry, I
we
didn't want
can
to cut. I
actually...
didn't want to cut myself.
But you can listen and you can cooperate. There's just
No, I
not
can't.
much point in doing
I can't. I'm sorry.
I understand your grammar and I understand your
If you wish me
needs
to
in a
cut
kitchen.
myself on screen, then I don't mind. I'll do it for you. I'll do what is ever expected of me to do.
Okay, well, just
If you want me
carry
to chop
on.
the chicken, I'll chop the chicken. If you want me to chop the mushrooms, I'll chop the mushrooms. If you want me to make the sauce, I'll make the sauce.
Okay,
But don't
just
expect
carry
me
on.
to sell my heart. Never expect that.
And more than that, he cultivates it. He turns the pressure into the culture of the kitchen itself. The suffering becomes part of the standard. The intensity becomes part of the identity. The unglamorous parts of being a chef, the fatigue, the fear, the emotional wear of trying to be perfect every night, stops being hidden behind the dining room and starts becoming part of the story. And somehow, Marco makes that struggle feel magnetic. He turns endurance into status. He turns survival into proof. He makes the hardest part of the job feel like a badge of seriousness. So in a world where chefs were still expected to look composed, Marco doesn't fully reject that image. He just lets people see what it takes to maintain it. He carries himself like someone who knows exactly how good he is and doesn't need permission to show it. And that creates something new in the culinary world. The idea that a chef can have charisma, that personality can be part of the product, that dining is not just about what is served, but who is serving it. And this is where the influence starts spreading. Because young chefs don't just want to cook like Marco, they want to survive under him. And that distinction matters, because survival becomes part of the myth. And one chef, more than any other, becomes tied to that myth. Gordon Ramsay. Ramsay trained under Marco Pierre White at Harvey's, and their relationship became one of the most famous chef dynamics in history, because Ramsay later describes breaking down in that kitchen, feeling the pressure, the intensity, the expectation. And Marco's response to that story has become almost legendary. Because when asked about it, he reframes it completely.
My reputation is a product of exaggeration and ignorance. Did I shout? Yes. Did I scream? At times. Service is service, and in service, chefs shout.
Mrs. Gordon?
He remains the only human being, as far as I'm aware, who's ever made Gordon Ramsay cry.
No, I didn't make Gordon Ramsay cry. He made himself cry. That was his choice to cry.
And this moment becomes a defining piece of both their legacies, because it shows two things at once: the intensity of Marco's kitchens and the mentality required to survive them. But more importantly, it shows how influence actually works in food, because Marco didn't just train chefs, he shaped personalities. And Gordon Ramsay didn't just become a great chef, he became a global figure in his own right, which raises a strange question. When your student becomes more famous than you, what does that say about your legacy? But I think there's a part of the Marco story people miss when they only focus on the mythology. The shouting, the stars, the chefs he made, the chefs he broke. Because for as much as Marco built his image around intensity, there's always this sense that he was never fully in love with the world that made him famous. That maybe the version of success everyone else was chasing was never actually the one that he wanted to keep. And if you listen closely, he kind of tells you that himself.
Where does your adrenaline come from?
Well, every Monday, me and Jean-Christophe count the money. We work out how much profit we've made, and that's where it begins. We start all over again.
The personal cost, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, no social life, no real time to yourself, missing out on a lot of the things I could have done like a lot of young boys. I haven't been to France yet. I haven't done anything apart from cook for the last 10 years. My link with Italy is my dream. That is the only place in my life where I was a very happy boy. And if I can get out of the profession in 10 years' time, because that's where my next goal is to be in Italy in 10 years' time, not in Los Angeles, in Italy, then I'll go there. That's where I want to go now, because that's where I had happiness as a child. And that's the only place on this earth I've ever really had 100% happiness. Maybe it's all a dream. Who knows?
And then, at the height of everything, Marco Pierre White walks away. He returns his Michelin stars and leaves fine dining entirely. Not slowly, not gradually, but deliberately. And for the industry, it feels almost unthinkable, because most chefs spend their entire careers chasing those stars. Marco had them, and he gave them back, which was honestly unthinkable at the time. Marco Pierre White became the first chef to make walking away from Michelin feel possible. Just to repeat, because it's so rare, at the height of his success, he gave back his stars and left fine dining behind. There are different explanations for why he did it: burnout, disillusionment, exhaustion, a rejection of the system itself. And the truth is, those explanations probably don't compete with each other. They probably reinforce each other. Because a decision like this, to walk away at the peak of your career, to leave the one thing you spent your life building, usually doesn't come from one problem. It comes from several, all pressing on the same fracture point. And with Marco, one of those fracture points seems very clear. He stopped believing in the system that was judging him. Because when you listen to Marco Pierre White talk about Michelin, or critics more broadly, you can hear the resentment, but also the logic behind it. He talks about how as Michelin has expanded, inspectors started handing out stars more freely than they once did, and how, in his view, there was a time when those accolades were tied more closely to the person actually behind the stove, the chef cooking night after night, service after service, year after year. And he makes another point that is harder to dismiss, that in fine dining, the people deciding what is exceptional are often less experienced than the chefs they're evaluating. And when you think about it, he has a point, because there's something strange about devoting your entire life to mastering a craft at the highest level, only to have that work filtered back to the public through guides, critics, and institutions that can never fully understand what it took to produce it. That doesn't mean Michelin is meaningless, or that criticism has no value, but it exposes the tension at the center of fine dining. The people creating the work and the people assessing value to it are not the same people. And for Marco, that gap seems to matter. Because if the stars are supposed to recognize greatness, but the people awarding them don't truly understand the labor, the sacrifice, or even the person responsible for it, then the stars start to lose their authority. And once that happens, the whole structure begins to wobble. So yes, Marco Pierre White walked away because of the pressure, because the life was unsustainable, because the intensity that built his legend was also consuming him. But I think he also walked away because he no longer respected the system that was supposed to define success. And that changes the meaning of the decision. It's not failure, it's refusal. Refusal to keep performing at the highest level forever. But also, refusal to keep chasing approval from a system that he no longer fully believed in. Because the same world that made him legendary is the world he ultimately chose to reject. And in a strange way, that decision becomes as defining as his rise. After leaving fine dining, Marco doesn't disappear completely. He reemerges in a different form. Television, brand partnerships, product endorsements, a different kind of visibility. Less kitchen, more media. And while yes, he does have restaurants that adorn his name currently, he is not running them though. He is not behind the stove, nor are they fine dining establishments. In all likelihood, they're licensing deals. And while some critics saw this as a departure from seriousness, it actually reinforces something important. Marco never stops being watched. And at his core, he never stops being a chef. Because even outside of the Michelin system, he still speaks about food with the same intensity, the same conviction, the same identity. But now, without the pressure of the kitchen attached to it. And that creates a very different kind of legacy. Because Marco Pierre White doesn't just sit inside fine dining history. He sits inside culinary culture itself, as a shift point. The moment being a chef stopped meaning just a profession and started meaning identity. And the kitchen stopped being just a workplace and became a reflection of the person running it, their standards, their behavior, their culture. So what's Marco Pierre White's actual legacy? It's not just the stars, it's not just Harvey's, it's not even Gordon Ramsay. Because Marco Pierre White doesn't just belong to fine dining history, he marks a before and after in it. A point where the role of the chef stops being contained and starts extending beyond the kitchen, the dining room, or even media. Because after Marco, a chef is no longer defined by just what they cook, but by everything that surrounds them. Reputation, presence, mythology. And that changes how the industry works. Because the kitchen is no longer invisible once service ends. It follows the chef out into the world. And Marco is one of the first where that becomes impossible to ignore. Not because he tried to create it, but because everything else around him made it visible. And once that shift happens, it doesn't reverse. It becomes the starting point for what becomes next. Because if Marco Pierre White was the moment the chef became a personality, then the next question is what happens when that personality scales beyond the kitchen entirely. And no one represents that chef more clearly than Alain Ducasse. Thanks for watching, and if there's a chef whose story and legacy deserves to be told, leave them in the comments below.